All right. Welcome, everybody. Grant and I are here to talk to you today. Postgres 101. It's been a series that we've both really enjoyed doing over the last number of months. Talking about Postgres, things that we've been learning, how we've been approaching it, and trying to help new users learn a little bit more about this database that is just going like gangbusters everywhere, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So Grant, you are in London today. You've been over there for almost 2 weeks, haven't you? In Europe?
Yeah. Just over 2 weeks. Be 15 days tomorrow.
Oh
But
wow. Yeah,
fly
I
back.
finally get to fly home, huh?
Yeah, fly back to the States tomorrow. So
That's great.
looking forward to it.
This is fun. It's fun to be able to do this across the ocean together and talk about Postgres. So, all right, a little bit about us to remind anyone who's new to this whole gig. Grant and I both work for Redgate, and so we are advocates for our products and for the databases that we support. So I am specifically really focused on Postgres at this point and database DevOps. There's some contact information there. I'm still on X/Twitter. I guess I need to change that icon at some point. LinkedIn, my blog, and sometimes YouTube. I'll get back to that here eventually. Grant, what about yourself?
Oh, yeah, I need to update that icon as well. I'm on X. Uh, that still feels weird. LinkedIn, that's my blog as well. And yeah, I've been with Redgate now for 12 years, and my Postgres experience. Well, I mean, I'm the new kid on the block, really, but I'm really enjoying talking about it because it is enabling me with my learning of it. So the more I talk about it, the more I learn. The more I learn, the more I talk about it. So it's a vicious circle, but I'm enjoying it. But
That's
this is
great.
my contact information. If you want to get in touch with me, you certainly can reach out. I left out my email. Oops, sorry.
They're Redgate. It's pretty easy, right?
Yeah.
All right. A couple quick housekeeping things. This is where we are. So today we're talking about Postgres documentation. And the reason we're talking about it, and Grant can attest to this, it is, as we'll discuss, is really thorough, but it is something for new users as they come into this ecosystem that can be really challenging. So we're going to go through that. Next month, I'm going to be walking you through a high level kind of an overview of what Postgres MVCC stands for, multi-version concurrency control, how it's implemented in Postgres, and then this process called vacuuming, which is unique and often confusing to new users. And it's really important to understand that almost regardless of which flavor of Postgres you might use, whether it's vanilla, something in the cloud, Azure, AWS, what have you. There are still components in vacuuming in most of those. And so we just want to help you understand how to use Postgres most effectively. So for this session, we will record. It is being recorded right now. It will be shared. If you are watching it, you'll get an email about it. If you know someone that wasn't able to make it today, they can register online and watch the recording after the fact. And any questions you have, please put them in the Q&A box. And the team here will pass them on. We will probably handle most questions at the end. That seems to work best. And so just please feel free to make sure you have questions coming in as we go. All right. So here's the agenda. We have four sections, probably maybe 30, 35 minutes, unless we really get chatting, which is apt or bound to happen at some point. The first part is probably the longest. I just want to give an overview of the documentation, what you can expect, where to, just kind of how to navigate a little bit, what that looks like, particularly if you're used to something like SQL Server. And then Grant's going to talk about SQL commands. This is one area that I see, SQL is SQL, but then we have things like T-SQL and PLPG SQL. So there's the commands themselves, and then how to actually use them. Again, it can be tricky to find them in documentation. If you just search on Google, you might end up in the wrong place or something. And then I'll give you a couple examples. And then Grant and I were fortunate to be able to be on a podcast a couple months ago with the Citus team. And they just, like over an hour time, what do you think? We got like 50, 60? I don't know.
Yeah, at least 50. It was just a fire hose of links.
Yeah, all these examples.
It was amazing. I thought I had a good grasp on sort of the infrastructure out there available for Postgres, and I did not. That's really true.
I told Grant, like, I went back through that list and I pulled out, I think maybe just 6 or 7 kind of high level examples of the kinds of blogs and resources that are helpful. And then we will probably continue to make more of those available, but there's just so much opportunity in this ecosystem. So we're going to review some of those as well. All right, well, let's get to it. So I want to talk about the Postgres documentation itself. It has been, so Postgres is open source, which means that it is a global development team of volunteers. Some people are employed by companies like Microsoft and AWS and what have you to contribute, but the documentation, if you download the PDF today, if you go to the documentation website, you can download a PDF version. It is now more than 3,000 pages. So it is very detailed and very dense and very well maintained over almost 30 years. And so the documentation is developer and community maintained. What that means is it's actually updated as part of, so in a previous webinar, we talked about the development process of Postgres and this idea of a commit fest. So there are about 5 of them a year. And these are the cycles about every 2 months that Postgres is updated. So if someone's contributed code or documentation, that is when the changes are committed to the code base and made public. And so the documentation is not something you can just go click a button, hit edit, and submit a change. It actually has to be part of the commit process for the entire project. Now, there's some really interesting things about this, right? So that means that documentation changes are, looked at as in depth in many cases as code changes, right? There's a lot of discussion around, is something more clear or not more clear? I got in a discussion a couple months ago about actually the MVCC process and vacuuming, which we're going to talk about next month. And it was a very long, it probably is still going on, just trying to understand how can we make this more understandable. So that's something to understand, to know. Again, if you're used to something like maybe Microsoft, you can actually pretty easily register and submit a documentation change for consideration. And so it's a little bit different in Postgres. The documentation itself is written in something called DocBook. It's kind of like an XML format. It's used by other projects. And really what that allows you to do is the structure is separate from the visual implementation. All right, so there's an easy way to link between things, and just as documentation grows, I'm not saying it's easy if you've never used DocBook. It's not. It is something to learn, but that's how it's been done for a number of years. And then the source and build instructions. So you can download the documentation source along with Postgres source and how to build the documentation if you would want to contribute. It's a great first way to think about contributing to Postgres, even though there's the cycle of the commit fest. You can actually go, and we'll see in a minute, to the Appendix J in the online documentation. And it will show you everything you need to do. So again, let me reiterate. The documentation is developer and community maintained. What that means to me, and I'm just going to see what Grant has to say, is that it tends to be pretty academic. It can tend to be very dense because it's the developer or the developers who were implementing the feature who have spent, in some cases, years developing this feature and have a very deep understanding of the technical process, and they want to document that. And so that has been one of the challenges. It's very academic, it's dense, and it is technical. You can learn a lot about Postgres by investing in the documentation, but it can take time. What do you think, Grant?
Well, yeah, my feedback on it is, so there's a person at Microsoft. His name's Connor Cunningham. He's been working on the engine internals and stuff. Amazing human being, right? Just one of my favorite human beings on the planet, and smart as a whip. But back in the day, he's great at it now. But there was a time when he explained things. It's a good way to put it. Poorly, and not because he didn't know, but just because he couldn't communicate to us mere mortals. It was, and honestly, the Postgres documentation is amazing, right? I could not come up with enough superlatives for it, but I think you've nailed it with bins, though, because while it is really incredible because you're seeing the thoughts of the people who wrote the code.
Right.
I don't really want to see the thoughts of people who wrote the code. I just want to know how to make it work. And
Yeah.
there's more explanation of what it does, what it is, how it functions, than there is of well, and it does this, and here's how you can use it. And that's what's, I don't want to say missing, because it's not missing, but I don't think there's enough of that, or it's harder to find in the documentation, I think.
Yeah, that's a great point. We in the Postgres community for the last number of years, Timescale has done a yearly survey of the Postgres community. And one of the comments with documentation, there's a section about documentation there, and consistently year after year, one of the complaints, not the right word, just the things that the community is asking about is how-to examples, right? So you talk about backup or recovery. We're going to give an example later. And there's a lot of discussion about what it is, what the commands are, but not a process necessarily. Here's how you would use these things. And so we're going to talk about what that might look like and go. So it's something recognized. I think many people in the community get this. And again, and I'm going to reiterate this later. We have another slide later to say it's really good documentation, right? It's just different. And so we have
It's
to understand.
amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, it's amazing. I think that's the one thing. I mean, for someone coming from other, through SQL Server and other, other documentation stuff, Microsoft, heck, even Redgate. I mean, I've been involved in lots of the Redgate documentation. We don't write it like this, and I'm not saying that in a negative fashion, that we don't. Well, I know I am saying it in a kind of a negative fashion. We don't expose the literal internals of how an index works, or what compare does, the way you get to see it inside of Postgres. That's just not there in most documentation. Now, there's probably reasons for that. I mean, private company versus open source, things like that. But I think I think it goes beyond that a bit. I mean, because it as you say, it's frequently the people who are writing the code or writing the docs, and
Right.
that's a very different point of view. I mean, I love
Yeah,
it,
for sure.
but
Yeah, for sure.
boy, it's different.
It is. All right. Yeah, we'll get into some more of that so people can see what that entails when you get to the actual documentation. So currently, and again, we're going to talk about how the documentation is set up. I'm going to show you that in just a few more slides. So every release of Postgres, Postgres 16 was released last Thursday, right? So the official release was last Thursday. And when that actually, while it was in beta, there was a version for Postgres 16 documentation on the website. So every release has a separate copy of the documentation. The supported versions of Postgres are maintained, and that means the current version plus the previous 4. So I think there's always 5 versions of Postgres releases are what we call in current support. So right now that would mean 12, 13, 14, 15, and 16 are technically the ones that the community is supporting. There's many older versions. I think back to Postgres 6 is still available online if you want to dig for it, but just recognize that. So the current one for Postgres 16, there's 1 preface section and then 8 major sections, which we'll look at in a second. And the organization is really, again, decided by the committers. If someone adds a new section for a new feature, there's discussion. Does it go in the internal section? Does it go in the SQL syntax section? Does it need to be inserted before a previous section, or do we just add it on? And so sometimes that means the table of contents honestly can be pretty challenging to navigate, because if there's a new feature, like, I don't know this to be true, but I'm just going to pull this out of the air for the moment. There's some new capabilities with logical replication in Postgres 16. If that happened to be a new section, it might simply be added at the end of one of those major sections. So it's not like it necessarily will follow on from a previous section about replication, because there's a lot of internal stuff that needs to happen there, right? So again, it can just be challenging, and we'll talk about what that looks like. So as we said, it's dense. These major sections are then divided up into chapters, and there are now, I don't know, 60 or 70. We'll see in just a second. The chapters themselves can literally be, again, remember there's more than 3,000 printed pages. So one chapter sometimes can feel like a little small book unto itself. And so just to recognize that as you're looking at it. And then the last thing, and I'm going to show you this in a few minutes, the internal, so there's lots of internal links to section, 27 and 13 and wherever it might go. But honestly, we're going to show you this one example next. And I click install and I click a link thinking it's going to show me how to install this from packages. And I end up at a page that only talks about how to install from source and other things. And so, the references only tell you the section and the subsection. So it might be a discussion about installation, and in parentheses, we'll see in a second. It says, see section 16.3, and you click that link thinking there's no other context, and you get to the section, you're like, what is this about? So it's just getting used to it and understanding. All right. So that example is, here's just one example I thought was interesting as we were looking at this a week or so ago. The chapter 19 talks about server setup and operation. But in the middle of that section, there's this chapter about upgrading Postgres, but that's between shutting down a server and preventing spoofing. So again, the organization can just be challenging. And some of this probably happened over many years because someone finally got a section written about upgrading Postgres, and that happened to be the next thing in line. So it just takes time to search, think about the commands you need to, and we're going to talk about some of that. So this is when I was telling you, Grant and I were actually in the same place last week in Cambridge, and we were looking at this. And if I go up to the Postgres main documentation, whoops, let me get back up there. We're going to talk about this more in a second. We happen to look at installing Postgres. And so there's installation and so forth. One was, I think it was getting started. And then getting started, there was installation. And we thought, great, this is going to be about installing Postgres. And mostly it points to chapter 17, which talks about, if I click that, how to install from source code. And so again, this is where from a community perspective, most of the people maintaining this documentation are installing Postgres from source every day, potentially, right? They're downloading the newest thing and they're building it. But you and I are not. And so then you have to look into that section. And it turns out there's another section in documentation that points to another page on postgresql.org, which shows you how to install it on Windows or on Mac or in your Linux distribution and things like that. So just kind of getting used to this repetition of, I think this is what I'm looking for. I'm going to get to a new section, and then we're going to talk about how to find help. So I have a couple other slides here, just talk about sections. Anything you want to add on to this, Grant?
No, it was hilarious when it happened last week. I mean, that's the one thing I would say, just because I'm sitting there gobsmacked going, wait, where's the install? Again,
Yeah, exactly.
Information for mere mortals, not just for the really smart people. That's really what it boils down to for me.
And I think what we'll talk about at the end then is actually where to find some of that help. So you can get the technical details here, the actual hands-on how-to, just some good areas and some good places to look. A couple other things, I just wanted to present 2 slides, so it's in recording and we talk about this. Where to start once you've at least gotten access to Postgres. You might not install Postgres. In fact, most people probably won't unless maybe you do it on your laptop with Docker or something. But you're probably going to get access somewhere online in most cases nowadays. And so as long as you can get connected, and we have, there's lots of articles. We have a few on Simple Talk, even about how to get connected to Postgres. We did a webinar a couple of months ago about that as well. Other sections that are really helpful to at least start to dig into from my perspective. One is just the SQL language itself. And so section 2 talks about all of the different, it's not commands, it's all the different parts of the SQL language. What are window functions? What does it mean to have, I'd have to look at the moment, there's I think 14, 15 sections. Server configuration is a big chapter, but there are a couple things that often come up in questions online. How do you plan for resources? What is it? There's actually an entire section on how the query planner works. And I was telling Grant this, if you go, I think there might be a link in that documentation, you can actually go to the source for the query planner And there are at least 1,000 lines, if not more at this point, of comments at the beginning of the C code for the query planner that actually goes into detail of how the query planner works and the actual function. So again, it's the developers who are writing this documentation. And in a lot of other cases, we learn it by asking questions, even SQL Server, like we know things, and Microsoft has shared things, but there are some things that still are challenging to understand exactly what it's doing sometimes. And so error logging, database roles are really important because they just function differently from, again, something like SQL Server. Backup and restore is a good first place. And then honestly, as you dig deeper, it is amazing that you have this internal section and you can really learn deeply about how Postgres, the database engine, works in many circumstances. So it's really, but that is, man, that's where you get dense and you get really into the weeds, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. I've actually avoided that section so far because I'm struggling enough. I don't necessarily need to get into that kind of stuff too much.
Yeah,
Um,
there's a lot of good
you
stuff
know,
there.
the one thing I would say is the commands section. Um, well, I mean, I think we're going to get to that in a minute, but
Yeah,
I really like the command section. We'll get to that. I'll shut up.
yeah, it's good stuff. Just a couple other things I thought I would just say, other sections that kind of come up. One is how the query planner uses statistics. Again, if you're a database, if you're DBA and you're helping to tune databases, that can be really, really helpful. PL/PG/SQL is the default Postgres procedural language. So I've said this in many other webinars. When you come from something like SQL Server, as I did, and as Grant has been doing for sure, we're used to everything we write. We think it is SQL, but it's actually T-SQL, right? It's SQL Server interpreting, and it's unless you tell it differently, it's always running as T-SQL. Well, in Postgres, that's not the case. You don't actually, you're only running SQL. If you need procedural things like variables and loops and so forth, you need to do that within a procedural language. And PL/PG/SQL is that default language in Postgres. Vacuuming basics. This is the article I told you about. I was helping, I was in this conversation in the mailing list at one point a couple months ago, trying to make it more accessible or just giving some thoughts on it. And it's not terribly basic, but it is very helpful to understand vacuuming. That's actually one of the topics for next month. And then the last thing is system catalogs and views, right? If you want to know how Postgres works, a lot of these catalogs and views are similar. They're just basic, relational database views for columns and tables and so forth that are shared among databases. And then they're Postgres specific catalog tables and views. And again, it's the developers who are adding all these things and helping you understand. There's a lot of good stuff in there to understand the system. All right, so last couple slides, then we're going to actually work through just one or two quick things before we get to SQL commands. So Grant, before I started at Redgate, I've been connecting to you over the years a little bit here and there, but probably 2 years ago, I saw that you were doing more with Postgres, and I said, hey, what are you doing Postgres, man? What's going on? And I think one of the first tweets or things I saw from you was about trying to find documentation for something you were writing. And this hits so many people. I go to Google and I search for something, and until about the last 12, 15 months, this was a multi-year effort on the community's part to try and get Google and other search engines to work better. Remember I said every version of Postgres essentially has a available set of documentation online. So there are 20 some versions or more. So search engines are cataloging all that. And if I say how to select into table Postgres, I might, if I'm not paying attention, I might get a link to Postgres 7. And if I don't see that, all of a sudden I'm working on an old version. I think you were doing backup and restore or something, right?
I was doing backup and restore. That was the first thing I looked at. And yeah, I did get it. I think it was 7. But it's the way the search engines work. It's the older stuff is for what, rightly or wrongly, the way the search engines work, old links are better links because they've had more people linking to them. They've had more references, that they've had more clicks.
Right.
So, all of that stuff from a search engine standpoint says that's the better thing to go after. And so, yeah, I sat down I did, how do you do a backup and restore? I got linked over to the Postgres documentation. I started typing commands. Things started burning. It wasn't toast and I was having an aneurysm. No. I was reading ancient documentation that no longer worked in the version of Postgres I was trying to work with. So yeah,
Yeah.
it was a shock and painful to me to realize that, oh my God, you better really, really double check that link after you've clicked on it to see where you're going.
Yeah. So let's actually show you that, because it is so consistent and it doesn't always work yet. So I actually am preparing for this talk, this webinar. I was looking at the documentation is in DocBook, but you'll notice if you happen to ever go look at the source, the files are SGML files, and that's historical. And so in my mind, I was thinking, well, these are still SGML. So I just looked up SGML Postgres. I got these 3 links, and none of these links go to the current. They all go to doc guide, right, in some source or something about documentation, but they're all to older versions. And so when you click any of these links, you'll see that we have a URL, and in the URL is always going to be the version of Postgres that this page is talking about. And I'll show you the documentation here next. And so in general, you either need to make sure you're looking at the version you're using. So if you happen to be using Postgres 12, you need to make sure you've clicked on that version of the documentation to make sure you have the right thing. Current, the word current will always be the newest version of Postgres that has been released. So as of today, that is equivalent to Postgres 16. And then the last thing before we get to actually showing you a little bit of documentation. One is starting with Postgres 16 plus. This has been a long-standing request, and actually, I wrote maybe a tweet or something, or a little. I was trying to link to documentation, so I think I wrote a little blog post saying, "I wish this was available," and it turns out it finally happened. It literally like a week before that, in May, someone had committed this, and so now in the Postgres documentation, you can click on, if you put your mouse over top of any of the headings, you'll get this little icon, the hash icon. And if you click it, you'll get a link to that section of the documentation. You used to not be able to do that. You'd have to go into the source and find the ID. It worked, and it's worked for years, but you had to do the work. And there are actually browser plugins that would show this for you. And it's now part of the documentation. So know that, because if you need a link to a specific section, now you can do it, and you can actually pass it to someone. And again, that's brand new with 16. So if you go to the documentation, which I'm going to show you now, and I click on, and I click, I'm on the current documentation, and I'll just go into one of these pages, and you'll notice when I go next to it, I get this hash. However, if I go back to, let me go back to Postgres 15, and I'll go to a similar thing, and I go to a subsection somewhere, if there even is any. I'll go to a different section because that didn't work. And you'll notice I don't get that anywhere. So again, these are very specific to the documentation and the version. But there's a lot of good stuff happening in what this is. So you'll notice up top, it will always show you what version you're currently looking at, the supported versions, all of those unsupported versions we talked about, right? There are a lot of versions that are still available online. If you're using Postgres 7.1, I'm sorry, you probably should. We should probably have a different discussion than talking about documentation. So,
Yeah,
that is your
time.
Yeah, exactly. That's your basic overview of how the documentation is structured. Again, knowing that it's dense, there's a lot of stuff to think through, but there's a lot of good, you'll become a better Postgres user as you find those sections dealing with mechanics and what the SQL language is about and what the configuration parameters are. But you're going to need help digesting some of that. So what we're going to do next is talk specifically about the SQL commands themselves, because that's often, I know for me, like I wanted to learn how to, honestly, one of the things was, how do I do a loop in SQL? Because I'm so used to T-SQL. How do I use variables? Or how do I use this specific form of the select or a window function? And so we're going to talk next about SQL commands.
Yeah, and there's a section in the documentation on SQL commands. So I mean, so that would be your place to start for sure. because that's, I mean, it's just going to tell you what you need to know. And honestly, it's the one section that I have found to be the most useful. It really isn't as dense. It's real. Honestly, I found it to be really, really great. I mean, if you want me to share, or you going to keep sharing there too?
Oh, you're welcome to, if you want, let's go ahead and switch over
Yeah,
so you can share. Yep.
why don't I drive for a minute? Let me share my screen. Oops. Oh, that's the wrong thing to click, I think. Technology is hard. Let's try this again. There we go. I've only got the one screen today, so there we go. It's all up. There we go. SQL commands. So, I mean, if you went, I mean, you could pick any of them, but I'm just going to pick alter table because I've been in this a few times, and it's one that it matters to me because I do a lot of work in DevOps. I do a lot of teaching in DevOps. Alter table commands are something I run a lot of, so it's just something I'm comfortable with, and so it's worth taking a look at here. There's really cool stuff. Alter table, if exists, is all laid out. Then it walks through. Are we adding a column? Are we dropping a column? Is there cascade? Disable the rule, enable the rule. It gives us a very, very good, thorough breakdown of everything that's going on. And it doesn't stop there. The best bit is it gets into descriptions. What is this? And it makes a really big difference to know what it's going to do for you. And unlike a lot of the rest of the documentation, I mean, I'm scrolling fast because this is, again, when we say dense, we mean dense. There is a lot to this documentation. But unlike a lot of the others, first, there are a whole bunch of notes talking about how these behaviors can affect other behaviors, which is really useful. And then finally, there are some very clear examples here. So there are parts of the code that you get into that the examples aren't clear. That's the one thing I'll say. Just don't want to be mean. I just want to be honest. The examples are not clear. However, you get in here and the examples are. There's some excellent examples telling you what you're going to be doing and showing you how it works so that you can get in there and see it. Now, they're not showing you some of the outputs from some of those examples. That would be a nice addition at some point, just to, again, add to the clarity. What do I expect to see when I run this command? And if I don't see that, oh my God, why? But honestly, this is some good stuff here. So I'll stop sharing. You can put back on your slide if you want.
Yeah, that's a great point, is that, and I think that is a product of, so many years of people. So that's the one of the things you and I've talked about a lot is, again, Postgres is very intent. The team that develops Postgres really cares about the SQL standard, sometimes for the good or bad, right? But I mean, they want to understand how to implement that SQL command well so that they know what they're supporting. And that shows in that documentation. You're right. Every one of those commands, there's so much there. And it's good. It makes you understand it better, but it takes time.
Yeah, and it takes some getting used to because you're used to honestly a more reduced set of documentation. This is good. I mean, it's thorough. I mean, it's very thorough. So really, it's hard to complain. But it is in the SQL commands that I've found that I get excited because when it says analyze, it's going to tell you what it does. When it says create materialized view, you'll have a really good understanding of what that's going to do, and you've got decent documentation examples in there that make it possible for you, the person trying to learn, to actually get something done. So, I mean, that's,
right.
Again, like I said, I can't say bad things about documentation. I can whine about, that it's not written for mortals, but honestly, that's whining. It's not the same thing as saying bad stuff.
Understood. All right. Just one example. So again, it's something Brent and I, oh my goodness, where did that come from? Grant and I have talked, that was weird. Grant and I have talked about. And that's, I think, what we're trying to say at the end of this, which is there's so much good information, but the one thing that generally lacks in the online documentation is a really, you'll be hard pressed to find any good how-to section about a detailed process. You'll find all of the details about that process. If you understand replication, you'll understand every piece about what is going on in replication, how the wall works, how things send, the various directories, what lag is. All that stuff is true. But as I'm going to show you in a second, if you want to actually, how do I just set up replication? You're going to have to go to find something else. So I want to show you a couple quick examples in some areas that might help.
I mean, and it's why I started with backups, is because I mean, create tables, drop tables, whatever. That's all, again, easy, and SQL syntax is pretty standard. But one of the first things I always worry about if I go, am I going on a consulting gig or anywhere else? I want to know what our recovery strategy is. So that's one of the first things I looked at in Postgres, and oh my God, was I lost. I knew everything there was to know about PG dump, but I still didn't know how to use it.
Yep, that's great. We're going to tie it. So you can show that one, because that's one of the things we're going to show. So
okay.
I'm just saying that often, if you look at the examples, I would say they're kind of like the foo bar examples. They might not actually be foo and bar, but they're very generalized. Again, because we're giving you the mechanics, we're not necessarily giving you the how-to at the end of the day. So, I just want to reiterate this 100 times over, right? It is great documentation. I feel like I had to, because it just is, but it's not always accessible. And we've said that 15 times already today, for someone new, right? So just learning how that works. So I was going to give you a quick example about high availability. And so I went to the documentation, and I'm in the chapter 27, which is high availability, load balancing, replication. And there's great information here. I can compare the different solutions. This is not a small page. It talks about all of the different ways. Some of these are not even Postgres related, right? Shared disk failover. There's nothing specific about Postgres there. It's just talking about all of the possible ways that you could have high availability. Now, then some of them are log shipping and logic replication. Those are built-in features of Postgres. But then if I want to actually go and look at log shipping, this is one very long chapter, like many of the detailed ones. And there's lots of good stuff in here, how to plan for it, what table spaces are. But you'll notice as I keep scrolling slowly, I haven't yet run into one block of how to do this, right? Here's 3 lines of a configuration file. And so instead, what I wanted to share is that this is where you have to be able to start to identify the companies, the online presence that has some good examples. Now, these are not, I have no affiliation with any of these, neither Grant nor I do. Simple Talk is getting more of this content, so I believe you'll see more of that as we go. But I then looked up essentially how to do streaming replication in Postgres, and there's lots of blogs and examples, but I just generally know that a company like EDB, which has been involved in Postgres for 20 plus years, tends to write pretty good content because partially they're the consulting company, but they talk again about what is this, and then you actually get step 1, step 2. So EDB is a good example. Percona, again, Percona is kind of it's a consulting company that really works with many open source databases, but they have a lot of good Postgres stuff. And again, that's where Grant and I are going to have a few others to share with you based on this example. But the couple that once you talk about backup, because it is funny if you go to that documentation. I don't know if I say funny, but these are just some websites I'm throwing out that I would say if you do a search in Google, Bing, wherever, and there are others. This is not to the exclusion. Again, Microsoft has some good stuff. Citus has some good stuff, but often focused on their product and their release. EDB, Percona, DigitalOcean, CyberTech. Oh, I did DigitalOcean twice. I didn't know that. And then Simple Talk, we're getting some, right? There's good how-tos that at least get you from point A to point B. It might not have all the technical stuff, and that's where documentation is, right? So that's why we use documentation. And so it's the mix of those two things. So yeah, do you want to talk about backup and restore real quick?
Oh, sure.
This is something we
I
do.
love that topic. All right, let
Let's
me get,
share screen again.
oops, hang on. I clicked it too soon. So got to get rid of the error message. Then I can share it. All right. So this is the backup and restore. And it's chapter 26, and off you go. And the initial layout's not exciting. I was really kind of disappointed, but fine. I need to look at SQL dump, and then there's file systems and continuous archiving. Okay, cool. So let's go to SQL dump. And we get an explanation of what SQL dump is, and you do get an initial thing of how to use it. But then it starts talking about ports and default connections and lots of stuff. Oh well, now we're in a restore. Like, wait a minute, I still don't know how SQL. I don't know how to use SQL dump already, and I'm lost. But we're now in restore. Then we've got a SQL dump all. Do we want to use that? Is it better? Is it worse? Then we've got some details on yeah, and we're done.
Yep.
I
And
I don't know how to back up a database. Please help me. I don't know how to back up a database.
right. And so that's where,
And
again, it's almost hidden, right? You look at those two links right there at the bottom or at the top, and you have to go to the command, right? So now you're saying, oh, PG dump, that link takes me to, I believe that should take me to the command, right? So here is
yes.
a very long page.
Oh yeah.
It talks about
Now
every feature, every switch, every function,
oh yeah, they break it all down. They get you into all the details that maybe you need, maybe you don't. But then I'm scrolling fast on purpose, because then you get to the notes, which will walk you through some recommendations and some mechanisms for actually ensuring that again, a restore strategy, not simply how does this work, what does it do? No. How do I arrive at a restore strategy? And honestly, I still don't have it from all the documentation. Again, the examples here, once more, what we get, and where on an alter table statement, it worked, I thought, but on backup, I was really frustrated, because the documentation tells me what to do, but it doesn't tell me why I'm doing that and what's the better approach, and what's the result of running this, what happens. And honestly, you can run a lot of these on your own systems, and it's not going to work quite the same way, because you're in a container or you're on Azure, or it was really honestly a bit frustrating.
Yep.
Just to be clear. So I'll stop sharing now.
Yeah. No, that's it. And I think that's, I feel like we keep coming back to the same point. It is saying that there's just so much, and it's really good. It's just understanding that often you're going to get an explanation, and you have to be looking in that explanation for links that might get you to more details, at least of how to use a thing. But then even that doesn't necessarily have exactly what you're saying. Well, what does consistency look like? What does it mean to have? Can you do a continual backup and archive, and whatever those things might be? So keep searching around. All right. Last thing we wanted to leave you with, and so this is going to kind of be a back and forth tennis match here, is a couple of sites. So remember, we said at the beginning of this, Grant and I were fortunate to be part of the CytusCon podcast 2 months ago, I think. We talked about, the subject was essentially our favorite ways of learning Postgres. And so out of that discussion, it was an hour-plus conversation, and there was a chat going on behind the scenes, and we got probably 50 or more links out of that. So I pulled some out. We're kind of going to go back and forth here, and just see anything else that comes to mind for you, Grant, and then we'll be done and take questions. So if you have questions, please put them in the chat. So the first thing I tell everybody that wants to learn more about Postgres or see what's going on is that Planet Postgres, so planet.postgresql.org, is run by the community. It is a blog aggregator. Anybody who has a blog, or any company that has a blog that is producing Postgres specific content, can register their blog. And anytime a new post goes out, when Grant and I do something on our personal blog or on the Redgate blog, we're on here as well. And this is updated daily. So there's actually a Twitter feed and a Mastodon feed, and so you can get notified when new content comes out. It's a really good way to stay on top of what's happening. And when you're on the
And,
website,
oh, sorry, go
yeah, go
ahead.
for it. I was gonna say, when you're on
Well,
the website, you go.
fine. But one thing I was going to say is that the, I mean, again, I'm still in an active discovery on this, but the Postgres community is amazing. They take on the idea of a rising tide lifts all boats. They are very supportive and active, and so the blogs and stuff that you'll see here, and I'll let Ryan keep going after I'm finished here, but the blogs and stuff you're going to see here are going to be useful, and the fact that the community itself has organized a methodology for sharing all this stuff in an automated fashion, it's just wonderful. I mean, it's they really are thinking about, it's really interesting. They think about it. They don't just do stuff. They actually sit down and plan things out. It's kind of crazy.
That's awesome. Yeah, totally agree. The two helpful things when you're on the front page, again, you can register for the RSS feed or whatever, but just the top posters, you'll see these names in a lot of places, right? And I didn't take the screen capture because my name is there. I was actually pretty shocked to see it there. I don't feel like I've put that much out in the last 2 months. Maybe I have. But you'll see these folks all over the place at events, really good content. And then most of these folks are part of teams. That's what what companies, you'll see Cybertech, you'll see EDB, you'll see Redgate. We're on there as a top team because we have more content going out. So so you can click any of these links and it will take you to their blog or take you to the company blog. And there's just really good stuff to see there. So please
I've
go
met
check out
several of
Plain
these people
Postgres.
now. I mean,
Yeah,
these are
yeah,
great people. I mean, they're really helpful. So, I mean, it's so cool.
totally agree.
It's mine.
Yeah, this one's yours, man.
Postgres. Yeah. Well, as I said, I love the documentation, but I was having a hard time learning from the documentation. So I found this one, and there are others. I'm not again, I'm not affiliated with these people. I actually I don't know if that I've met them or anything yet.
I actually don't know who
Um,
does this. I've tried to find out. I
okay.
don't know who it is. Yeah.
Cool. But anyway, it was just structured nicely, and it's very much about a how-to, right? It is a tutorial and
Yep.
not a in-depth documentation, but much more a how-to. And the examples are up to date, which was, I mean, I don't know if
Yep.
they're all up on 16 right now, but they were up on 15. So it wasn't like you get in there and you start typing and nothing works. I was actually typing stuff from here, and even a couple of copy and pastes, just because like, oh well, what the heck, let's just try it, and it worked. So it was very, very good resource, I thought.
Totally agree. Yep. It comes up often, and it's just something that you're going to find. So you might as well get used to it. I think it's almost like the missing piece, at least for a beginner, right? You have the documentation, you look at the command, and there might be other good resources, but Postgres tutorial, whoever is maintaining that's doing a pretty good job of giving you a simplified how to use this feature in Postgres, this command, this whatever. The next one is Tepez. So this is a gentleman, say Hubert, let me go back up here. It is, yeah, Hubert. So you'll see Hubert right here. Oops, lost my mouse. There it is. So Hubert is very active on the Postgres Slack. So if you sign up for the Postgres Slack, you will see him all day long answering questions. This website has a couple things, just good content, but he has actually for years now provided and maintains a query planner visualization tool. So it's not a visualization tool like we're used to in SQL Server with the graph. It will take your explain output and it will give you a table of every node, how much is happening. There's lots of good. It's one of the 2 or 3 places that people will go to say, hey, I need help with this query plan. I need help tuning it. So it's a great opportunity, and other features in there, but just a really good community member. You've met the Cybertech folks, I think, a few of them, right?
I have helpful, intelligent. I mean, like I said, I can't overemphasize this either. I'm blown away by the community and these people are representative. I mean, they are approaching the stuff with the full knowledge that if they help people, it's just going to help them, right? It's nothing. I've seen communities, other kinds of communities where, information is protected because what I know and you don't empowers me, which I've really never understood, but you don't see that here. These people are great. I think I met them first in Malta, I believe.
Yeah, I believe you did. Pablo was there and some
Yeah,
others.
yeah.
Actually, Pablo's going to be coming to PASS. He's speaking at PASS Summit. So
Excellent.
it's going to be awesome.
Cool.
Yeah, Pablo's really, the whole team, super knowledgeable, and they do a really good job creating accessible content. They don't make a 8,000 word blog post. They say, let's talk about streaming replication, and they might produce 4 or 5 of them, and they've been in this for 20 plus years, so they will go into all the nuances and they'll try and make a break and show you what happens. So just really, really good stuff. Lorenz is one of the highest. He is probably one of the top responders on Stack Overflow for Postgres content. He's been doing Postgres for 20 plus years. And so
I don't think we've met, but I know him from Stack Overflow. I see his answers all the time.
Oh, he's on there all the time. He has more hair in Stack Overflow picture than he does now, but he's really good guy, really good guy. All right, two or three more, and then we will be done. Again, just stuff for you to know. So PG Analyze is a tool that helps you, understand maybe how to improve your Postgres server output right now. The Lucas, who actually started the company and runs it, I believe came from Citus. I didn't know that until a few months ago. So was acquired by Microsoft, and he had been working on this for a while anyway, and has a great little company. But the cool thing about it is, again, he's just a great communicator, he and his team. And so there's good articles on there. He does a pretty weekly podcast, almost every week, called 5 Minutes of Postgres, just kind of figuring out what's going on in the community that week. He might pick 2 or 3 stories and just literally in 5 minutes or less talks about it. So it's worth looking at their blog and finding Lucas and their team. All right, 2 more, and then anything else you want to throw out. Have you ever used the art of Postgres? Do you know this?
No,
I didn't ask you this.
This is not one I've dug into before. So I mean, I recognize it from the list, the exhaustive list of links we had from Citus. Those people were awesome, by the way. I mean, can't say
they were. It's a good team.
Yeah.
Again, one of them, Claire,
you'll
will
have to
be
talk about this one.
Summit. Yeah. So the art of Postgres is Dimitri Fontaine, and I think I spelled his name correctly. I may have to go fix that. So Dimitri has, again, been involved with Postgres for a very long time. This is a personal project of his that he's done. You can purchase the book, and there's a website, and the website just over the years basically breaks down all the chapters of the book. And so what he doesn't do is, if you go into a section about query planning, maybe, he won't tell you. He basically says, if you want to learn about this, that's what the documentation is for. So he doesn't repeat it. And he says, now let me give you an example. And so there's lots of examples, and they're all using some kind of open data. And it's very, there's a lot of different examples. So it's not like, here's my one database set. He'll use a Twitter thing. He'll use open source from a government website. He'll use, phone call records from some sample somewhere else. So there's just lots of really interesting examples. He's very good with the SQL language itself. And so you'll get lots of interesting examples of window functions and ways to do stuff that you wouldn't think about otherwise. So I do recommend it. I think it's maybe US $100 or less. I actually don't remember to get the actual physical copy and digital access. I did because I just wanted the physical copy, but a lot of good stuff there. And then this is the last one I wanted. Yeah, it's the last one I wanted to talk about. So Bruce actually lives in the States. He's out of Philadelphia in Pennsylvania, not far from where I'm at. Bruce is one of the original founders of the Postgres development community. All of a sudden, I can't remember the exact acronym, but I list this for a couple of reasons. Bruce is just a stalwart in the Postgres community. He's been at this literally since the beginning of the open source project in 1996. He speaks often for the last 20 plus years all across the world, and he's a good presenter. And all of his presentations are on his website. And they're updated. There's links to examples. I think he's at almost 60 at this point, often internals based, just lots of different things to think about. Now, again, Bruce is an academic to an extent, right? So you're not going to get lots of animations on websites. It's very static using open source tools, and you're not going to get PowerPoint, right? But the content is really good. Like if you go look at his MVCC presentation, it's probably 100 slides, and it's step by step. What does the table look like as you're going through and so forth. So it's just I'd be amiss if I didn't mention Bruce. Now again, we've given you 7 or 8 websites. There are tens and dozens more of good websites, but these are a couple places to get started. The last thing, I don't know if you've used any of these. We've talked about CitusCon. Grant and I have been a part of their podcast. PGUS does record any of their conference. They have generally recorded their conferences over the last many years. And so those conference talks are available on their YouTube channel. Postgres Conference is a different company. They run a separate Postgres conference, and they have for many years. And so they do webinars and they do conferences, and all of their talks are available at that YouTube channel. CitusCon has been going on for 2 years now. It's run by Microsoft. It's a virtual conference every spring. And there are probably close to 50 talks from the last 2 years, some of them from core committers. And so you'll get some really good information. Anything else you have found? I honestly, I didn't spend a lot of time because I go to these so often, but
I tend to not learn from videos as much I learned more videos are for hardware, man. They're not for software. But,
okay.
But yeah, I've definitely seen PGUS and definitely seen Postgres Conference. I haven't seen any of these CitusCon videos yet.
Yeah.
But
check it out.
I'm still new though. So I mean, it's all an active discovery.
That's great. All right, so I don't know if we have any questions. We ended up talking for the hour, man. I knew we'd do it. There's just so much, so much we could talk about.
I wasn't worried.
So I'm just going to do. There's one more slide here, just to remind everyone that past Data Community Summit's coming in November. It's in Seattle. Grant and I are going to be there. Many people from the Redgate team. Lots of the folks that you know and love, who are great teachers in the SQL Server community, are going to be there. We have 12 to 15 Postgres sessions with some of the people in the Postgres community, and one is a learning path to actually try and get some of the basic stuff under your belt if you want to do that. It's how to install and use. I'm going to be talking how to install and just get connected to Postgres, talking about MVCC and table load, what do indexes look like, how do you think about query planning and so forth. So please think about registering now. I think we have the price bump is in another day or two. So if you haven't registered, do it now.
Now's the time. Yeah.
Now's the time. All right. So it looks like we have a comment. It says, I found the Postgres documentation to be among the best in the industry. I learned more about T-SQL from their doc than just about any other source. Interesting. Vendor extensions.
Cool.
I'm not. Yeah, that's fun. I don't know. I see our team typing. We might have one more.
All right, let's see.
Might not. Any other quick comments that come to mind? And I'll just remind everyone that we are going feedback.
I mean, yeah, I was going to say, the one thing I would just say is make sure you keep watching this space, because you and I are both generating content. So there's going to be more.
Trying to help. And last thing, I almost forgot about this slide. I thought I put this earlier.
Oh.
If you haven't, we have a few more, I believe, till the end of this month. So, about 10 or 11 more days. The state of the database landscape is our Redgate survey that is trying to understand more about how people are using numerous databases now. We came from a lot of history where we used one database. We used SQL Server, we used Postgres. We just made everything work on that database. And now we know we have access to so many different kinds of databases, and companies are using them. They're choosing the database for the job. We want to understand that. And we think that a lot of people can gain from this. So please take time and participate in the survey for us.
And the information is all going to be published. So, I mean,
that's
anonymized,
right. Yep.
of course, but it will be shared. So you're not going to just give us information. We're going to give it right back to you. We're going to take the aggregates and spit them right back out. So this is useful stuff, and it'll be available to everybody.
That's great. Cool. Grant, it's been a pleasure to talk with you. I hope you get some sleep and get ready to fly home finally. I'm sure you'll be happy to be on this side of the pond and see your family.
Yeah, I miss my family, my wife, and my pillow, more or less in that order.
That's great. All right. Well, everyone, thanks so much for joining us. Hopefully this has been just a helpful discussion about Postgres documentation and gives you one more tool in your tool belt for learning Postgres. Have a great day, and it's great to be with you.